Hey, what's up, everyone? So, this is going to be the 66th opening that I like to share with you, which is the Buffalo opening. So, essentially, it's named like a Japanese opening since it's an animal. And of course, you play this as a perhaps an advanced player would be recommended for this, and you play this as black. So, the basic sequence is F5, and opponent plays a diagonal since we're going to the diagonal branch of openings. And of course, black jumps into e6, which is the standard. And of course, white plays d6 over here, which is a very natural continuation of the diagonal opening. And of course, among all of these choices, this may not be the best one for sure. So you reduce your advantage a little bit, but you play c3 over here, which kickstarts the Buffalo or Kenichi variation. So personally, I just prefer to name it as a Buffalo opening. So over here, I would say that this particular opening is something that people don't really prepare that much relatively for, as opposed to maybe c5 and e7 moves, since these are the draw moves. So I think I would say that Buffalo and Snake are probably the next more common openings. In fact, I think Snake is probably slightly more common than Buffalo, perhaps. Buffalo, not that much people play it, but Mr. Hideshi Tamenori, the seven-time world champion, I've been observing him to play this, and he has achieved a lot of success in this particular opening. And of course, the typical continuation for this one would be g4, given that it's the best move, and you follow up with c6, basically forming like a mid-game pocket over here, a two-square pocket, in a sense that if white jumps in, you can regroup to either one of those. And over here, it's fairly counterintuitive for white, and at the same time, it's also very counterintuitive for black. So I would say that this is a very challenging opening to play. And of course, the natural book response is that this wouldn't be too difficult for white to jump to, because white plays this particular, flips this particular e5 square disc, which is essentially surrounded by all the existing discs together with the disc it just placed. So I think at the start, it's still fairly intuitive. It's only when white begins to approach the edge that it becomes fairly counterintuitive, because typically you wouldn't want to make dispersive moves like d8 or maybe even f8. But yeah, white would probably prefer to play either c5 or d7 naturally. But I would say that most of the time I see people playing d8, probably because they know the book opening. And of course, over here it's still remains quite a few playable options for black. I would say that c7, it's probably the book sequence, one of the book sequence at least. And of course, white jumps in, black goes in. And of course, once that shape has been established, I would say it's a lot harder for white to continue to play on, easily to touch on these edges, because you probably wouldn't want to do that. You might want to visit the tail end of it by playing to c5. And of course, black, very difficult to do is something that is very difficult to do is to try to identify such options to control two mini diagonals at once. So he controls the c6 and d7 sequence, this line over here, in a sense that white is unable to intersect, and of course at the same time black controls d5 to e6 mini diagonal. So these two squares are not something that white can play to. So that is essentially the Buffalo opening. I would say another common response by white, besides playing the g4 book move, is to play f4, and this is very, very common also. When I play and try the Buffalo opening, again, black is just forming that pair again in the mid game, and white jumps in as a block. So I think this is also quite often played. So you would then have to kind of just play towards the center, and I would say that this is counterintuitive for white, because chances are that you probably want to flip one disc instead of two. But if you know the book, which I think most people do by now, it's still fine. But if you were to just take an edge move to e1 from here, or f3. So f3 is a sequence that I think it's fairly intuitive for white to just jump into the center, and then you would follow by e1. So why not play e1 first, back the response to c1 for a cross back, and then potentially over here there's one particular variation that you can try, which is g6. G6, even though it's -3, it's generally difficult for opponent to follow up as well. If white jumps into the easy center, if white is just aiming to cut this this row of 5 black discs right into the center, that would still be the best move, but you can follow up with something as dispersive as C2 or maybe something like F8. So personally, I like to play C2 sometimes. I think G3 is also an option. So if you play C2, white jumps in for the easy cross back into the center, sure. But then you can jump into C5, which is a nice centralization, and this basically poisons C4. And white probably wouldn't want to play either of these moves. It seems counterintuitive to give up a nice easy pocket move for black, like white black perhaps. But if white is able to somehow figure out this sequence, then it would be harder for black to continue. But I would say that on face value, it's fairly counterintuitive for white at this point to follow up. And black can even give up the edge, give up even row disc to the top. That's fine. The advantage that you give up is not that much, but at the same time, you kind of make white surround you. So I would say that it's counterintuitive for white to follow up in this case, and it severely limits white's options. So I think it's a fairly nice variation to play, and something that you could consider playing. And of course, if you were to explore playing G3, again, assuming white kind of interacts with this disc that you just flipped, play this one, you can just kind of play through that sequence, and I would say that it's more or less about the same in terms of the complexity, but you can see that all of these sequences somehow leads back to C2 being one of the key discs to play eventually. So that is essentially the Buffalo opening. So yeah, I would say that those two are the most popular response to Buffalo opening. Another one that you might have to take note of would be D3, which is the Hokuriku Buffalo variation. So this, I would say, is very counterintuitive to play this particular move to E7 as the best move. One would probably prefer to play C5. So I think that would be 3 variations you might want to take note of if you want to kind of challenge yourself and play the Buffalo opening. From personal experience, I do find that it's very challenging to play the Buffalo opening, so you definitely need to take some time to study the opening, and hopefully you achieve some success. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye!